Hi, thank you for joining us today for the 18th episode of Nima Voices, Discover Nikkei's virtual interview series. My name is Gwen Muranaka, and I'll be your host for today's episode. I was the former senior editor of the Rafu Shimpo, the Los Angeles Japanese daily news based in Little Tokyo. And before that, I worked in Tokyo for the Japan Times and at the Pacific Citizen, the Japanese American Citizens League newspaper. I also draw cartoons, and I've contributed stories to Discover Nikkei throughout the years. Before we start the program, I'd like to briefly introduce the Discover Nikkei project and the Nima Voices series. Discover Nikkei is the Japanese American National Museum's international community-based web project with major funding from the Nippon Foundation. The site is in 4 languages: English, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese, and shares unique Nikkei stories from around the world, including the US, Brazil, Japan, Peru, Canada, Argentina, Mexico, and many other countries. News stories are published daily on the website, which has been undergoing a major redesign and the addition of exciting new features over the past few years. This year marks Discover Nikkei's 20th anniversary, and we are holding special programming throughout the year to celebrate this incredible milestone. Nima are members of the Discover Nikkei online community. The term Nima comes from combining Nikkei and nakama, Japanese for colleagues, fellows, or circle. Hailing from all over the world, Nima bring unique experiences and perspectives to the site's rich community. Nima Voices is an interview series where we uplift our Nima through brief but enlightening interviews. Today, we are launching a new format for Nima Voices. We are now pre-recording each episode and adding vetted subtitles to encourage our global community to enjoy, engage, and learn from each other. In today's episode, I will be talking with Naomi Hirahara. Naomi is an Edgar Award-winning author of multiple traditional mystery series and noir short stories. Her Mas Arai mysteries, which have been published in Japanese, Korean, and French, feature a Los Angeles gardener and Hiroshima survivor who solves crimes. Her first historical mystery, Clark and Division, follows a Japanese-American family's move to Chicago in 1944 after being released from a California wartime detention center. It won a Mary Higgins Clark Award. A former journalist with the Rafu Shimpo, where I used to work, Naomi has also written and co-written numerous nonfiction history books, including the award-winning Terminal Island: Lost Communities on America's Edge. 1001 Cranes is her first middle grade novel. Her follow-up to Clark and Division, Evergreen, was released in August 2023 and was on the USA Today bestseller list for 2 weeks. Naomi has also written many articles and stories for Discover Nikkei since 2007, including 9 serial fiction stories. She is involved in the Los Angeles Little Tokyo community as a member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society, and especially as co-chair of its annual Imagine Little Tokyo short story contest, for which Discover Nikkei is a partner. So, hey, Naomi, how you doing?
Hello.
How's it going?
It's great. And
Great.
it's so nice to hear you actually pronounce my name like my mother pronounces it, Naomi, and my really good friends. I mean, it speaks to your time in Tokyo, I think,
I think so,
too.
and it does speak to so I went to UCLA and I my professor was Yuji Ichioka. And I used to go into class and he'd say, "So what is your name?" And I'd say, "Oh, my name is Muranaka." And he'd go, "Muranaka." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I always remember that whenever I try to speak.
No, I really appreciate that. Although I usually, when people ask my name, I usually say Naomi.
Naomi.
I would prefer Naomi, but it's fine.
It's working in the Japanese community, and yeah, like you said,
Yeah.
being in Tokyo, you kind of learn these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, we've talked a little bit about family, but can you tell us a little bit more about your family background and your experiences in the Japanese American community growing up?
I'm unusual. I'm kind of an outsider in
Mm,
some ways to the traditional Japanese American family, or, in, like, let's say Southern California, because my parents weren't in camp.
mm.
My mother is a Shin Issei. She's a post-war immigrant from Hiroshima, and my
Ah,
father is Nisei, who was born in Watsonville but went to Hiroshima
mm,
with his let's see, I guess three elder siblings in the 1920, no, 1930s.
mm.
And he was there during the duration of the war. So my parents are atomic bomb survivors.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's their history. And then they got married and, started a life in Altadena, Pasadena, California in the 1960s. And I was born, shortly thereafter. So I always feel a little different with my friends because I have some friends who are Yonsei and they're always asking me, like they find some kind of old, vase with Japanese writing, Naomi or Naomi. What does this say? And if I don't know, my mother's still alive. She's like 89 and
Mm,
still very Genki. And I could ask her, Mom, what does this say? So I think it puts us in kind of a unique place that we are more kind of connected to the homeland. I have more
mm,
relatives in Japan than here. And sometimes, we're very small, small family. And in some ways, I think it's kind of liberating for me as a Japanese American writer because I don't have the politics of camp,
mm,
and was your family no? Did you fight for the U.S. Army? All these kind of factions that, still kind of haunt us today.
that's true.
I don't really have that. It's like my parents survived the atomic bomb. It's like, oh, okay. So I think that kind of gives me a more global perspective
Mm,
about being Nikkei, which I kind of appreciate. Of course, I've had to learn, the Rafu Shimpo was really a time of education for me about our
mm.
community, which I really appreciate.
Before you started at the Rafu, what were your experiences in the Japanese American community?
Japanese, I mean, I was involved, but it was in our little, Pasadena area.
Mm,
So I was a Pasadena Bruin. I played
mm,
basketball. I went to the Christian church, the First Presbyterian of Altadena. I went to the dreaded Japanese school. And it was kind of interesting because a lot of my classmates were like me. They had one parent who was an immigrant.
mm,
So there weren't that many kind of typical sanseis in my class. It was a lot of us that had more bicultural upbringings, which
mm,
is kind of interesting. Um, yeah, so it was my it was very divided. And then I
mm,
went to a school in Altadena. It's under Pasadena Unified School District. So that's one of the first West Coast school districts that had
mm,
mandatory desegregation. So the whole issue of race, was very present, but it was white, black, but where do Asians and Latinos kind of fit into, that whole um, discussion.
yeah.
So those things were heavy. And then, on the weekends, I was Japanese. And then on the, Monday through Friday, I was either going to school with predominantly African American students. And later we
Mm,
moved to South Pasadena. So it was white students. So, I'm kind of negotiating all these things. And it was also a time where it was definitely not cool to know Japanese, which is
mm.
hard for us to fathom,
Yeah,
right?
that's very true.
Because anime and manga, it's so cool. Where do you want to go? For your vacation, I want to go to Japan. Whereas back then it was, oh, that was cheap transistor radios. It was, there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment. There was, when I
Mm,
started working for the raw food, there was a lot of like kind of the what was it, the Michael Douglas movie, was it Black Rain or something? There was a lot
mm,
of very critical depictions of Japanese, kind of, we're kind of feeling echoes now,
sure.
probably more aimed maybe towards Chinese. Yeah.
Hmm, hmm. I guess you mentioned Altadena and what has happened with the fires, and you, as a writer and someone who grew up there, how have you been processing what's happened there, and as you see it moving forward, and as it kind of works towards rebuilding what was there and what has been
It
lost?
it's going to be, I mean, Altadena is, I won't say was, I will say still is a really magical place. I think that has really informed me to become a writer, just because the mood there, it's unincorporated. You got a lot of independent creative people. I had teachers who really encouraged me to embrace my heritage in writing. And that was like in fourth grade. I had never done that before. I was always an avid reader and writer, but my models were, blue-eyed, blonde-haired girls, and that's what my stories were. But then finally, there was like this breakthrough in fourth grade, and I could write about like a Japanese immigrant, little girl who comes to America, and the family, they eat raw ground beef, like sashimi, like really silly stories. But at least there was some kind of attempt, like to um, reflect someone like me. So it's really devastating. Fortunately, a lot of the institutions, like the Buddhist temple, the Christian church, and the community centers are still standing, but and they are rushing to really, they've been there to help the many people who've lost their houses, either legacy homeowners or people or Japanese speaking people who are kind of new to America. So it's been heartwarming. I have gone to the Buddhist temple where they've been doing some of this food distribution. And it's kind of like, going back to my childhood because you're seeing old friends and touching base. But yeah, it's going to be very, very tough to
Mm.
see what comes out of it. However, I'm atomic bomb survivor's kid, and I think there's like connections. Like at one time, Hiroshima, there was nothing, but now it's one of my favorite places to go in Japan. So I
Mm.
hope Altadena will have that kind of same fate in the future.
Mm. So you mentioned that you kind of started writing when you were in the fourth grade, which is incredible. How did you then progress? And then how did working at the Rafu Shimpo change or inform your writing?
I will say this, I don't think our education system, like in elementary school, it's okay for you to be creative, but I think in middle school and high school, it's more like, what's your future? How are you going to make money? And so my creativity was kind of stilted at that time. And then actually, I went to Stanford. David Henry Wong had been there, and there was an Asian American theater project. So there were some things, even, when I went to college, that kind of encouraged that kind of expression, more like playwriting. But Gwen, I don't know how you feel about Rafu. I mean, it's a hard, we work hard.
Yeah.
Every person who's worked at Rafu Shimpo has really, sweat, blood, and tears. And when I was there, we had to work 6 days a week and, work nights. And
Mm.
it was, and you're driving all over the place. But it's like this wonderful education, at least of Southland Japanese America. You're driving to Boyle Heights, you're going to Crenshaw area, you're going to Gardena, the South Bay, and you're interviewing all sorts of people um, from the poorest, because Little Tokyo has, and I think a lot of Japanese communities traditionally are next to areas um, that are impoverished. There's a lot of skid rows next to like a Little Tokyo. So from the home to the unhoused to people who are, the leaders of the nation. So I think that was such a wonderful initiation for me. And for people who know how tall I am, I'm a little less than 5 feet tall. There were two other Naomis at Rafu Shimpo, and I was known as the big Naomi.
Is that right?
Well, kind of. Yeah, we had like someone's kid that was working there. I think she was still taller than me. But what I'm getting at is when I'm in other spaces, people always make comments on my size, whereas like a place at Rafu Shimpo, who cares? That's not a big issue. It's more like we have to do the work and the story, and some external trappings are less important.
Mm.
So I kind of appreciated that freedom to be who I really was internally and not how I was defined by perhaps my ethnicity or my appearance that was related to,
And,
being Japanese American.
and as writers for the reporters for the Rafu Shimpo, you're often covering stories and individuals who are not covered in the mainstream news and or covering it from a perspective that is different from the LA Times or another newspaper. And yeah, I think beyond being on the kind of deadlines that you have at the RAFU really requires you to really hone your skills, learn on the fly. Everybody has to do everything, every job. I mean, it's incredible. And I kind of love the fact that you talk about that you're big Naomi and that there's a little Naomi because even at the Rafu we had a big Gale and a little Gale, and neither of them are taller than 5'2".
Yeah.
But in a place like the Rafu that's considered big, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
Um,
and it began my love affair with Japanese American stories, right?
mm,
Because I think some people would say, "Oh, you don't want to be, pigeonholed,"
mm,
And even as myself, as now a novelist, like, do you really want to always write about Japanese American stories? You don't want to be in that, defined so narrowly. But what happened at Rafu Shimpo is like there were all these layers of stories. You're learning about the Japanese Latin Americans, the Peruvian story, Crystal City. It's like so many variations of being Nikkei in
mm,
this, not only in this country, but globally. So I think, yeah, quite the opposite thing happened when I started working for the Rafu Shimpo. I didn't feel limited. I felt actually more expansive in
mm.
in who we are. Yeah.
What I love about your work is that you do feel these different layers of society that comprise the Japanese American community. It's not this monolithic thing. Uh, there's good people, there's bad people, there's people on different edges of society that I don't think as Japanese Americans we often are given permission to explore these different nuances, which I appreciate that you do. And I sometimes see it and I think, oh, I kind of recall us covering a person somewhat like that because the Rafu Shimpo doesn't just cover Nisei Week, the pillars of society. You also, as
Hmm.
part of our work, we would cover crime and things that would happen and corruption. And then how did you then turn from being a reporter, a journalist, to start writing fiction? And what drew you to mystery as a genre?
I was always interested in becoming a novelist,
Mm,
and that was probably my main goal. I kind of fell into working at the Rafu Shimpo, and it was one of the few ways at that time. Now it's harder that you could actually make somewhat of a living, being a writer, journalist, being a journalist. So. And that was so helpful for me to kind of enter these worlds. It's funny, you mentioned, well, a couple things. One is, again, being a hibakusha kid or a kid, with kind of, my dad's American, but he has kind of an immigrant's kind of POV. To be raised like that, I don't have that many aunties and uncles in this
mm,
country. And I think there's, especially someone of my generation, there was so much pressure to be a model minority, to not be that criminal, although we had them, and to put up a good front, not to be the black sheep. But in my case, because I don't, our family doesn't have a long history in this country,
mm,
I felt more freedom to kind of, and I guess I'm drawn to, noir or these like complicated stories, a lot of dramatic stories. I do think covering crime at Rafu Shimpo, kind of whetted that kind of appetite too. And, so we had this thing, now everything's all different, but we had this little teletype. I mean, it just had this very brown paper, that came out, and it was like city news service, and you heard about a shooting, and it was like a
Right.
Japanese name, and you tore it off, it's in this world, and then you had to get on the phone with whatever police station and talk to the watch commander, and if it went to the next level, you talk to the DA or assistant DA. So I think that was a good initiation. A lot of mystery writers have been journalists, and I found
Mm,
out during the pandemic that Michael Connolly, who's this
mm.
best-selling writer, he was at the LA Times a few blocks away the same time I worked at Rafu Shimpo. But of
Oh,
course, we were, covering very, you know, different kind of stories. But I just found that really interesting how we could have been, passing each other on the sidewalk.
I love how Rafu Shimpo is often a character in your work, and that you populate it with people that those of us who are in Little Tokyo are aware of, even if someone uh, who's in France or in Japan may not know this, but it kind of gives it that real sense of the neighborhood, the feel, the character. Um, but was there a piece that you've written, and you've written so many, either at the Rafu or in fiction that you kind of go back to and think, that it was particularly meaningful?
Um, you know, I think as a novelist, actually, you kind of have to inhabit most of your characters.
Mm,
You have to find a connection with that villain and that, evil person. And also, there's a lot of like my last novel, Evergreen, which, has scenes in Rafu Shimpo 1946. It had just reopened after World War II. And I put really real life people, like the former editor at the time, his name was Henry Morey. So he's a character in
mm,
there. And so, I think each book is meaningful because I'm writing it from a certain thing that I'm going through, a Clarkin division, the story about 1944 Chicago. I never spent any long time in Chicago. I did research, but we were coming out of the pandemic, and just that feeling of being like Aki Ito, my character, being confined
mm,
in a place which we all went through, and then suddenly coming out of that and try to find your way, So I think each book is very personal. I will have to say Summer of the Big Bachi, which was my first book,
mm.
which I was writing while I was working at Ralph Shimpo. It took 15 years, and maybe even
Wow.
more before it became pub, you know, published by a New York publisher. It's that book will always be dear to me for that reason. And I was writing about a character like my father. My dad was a gardener, like so many other Kibe Nisei men were. And after World War II, 1 out of 10 Japanese American men were gardeners. So I think this is the power. You don't get paid usually that much for being a writer, but I guess the power we have is to make certain people like
Mm.
our dear late Mario Reyes, who has appeared a couple times in my book, like a Mexican American person before working for a Japanese newspaper. What?
With the glasses. I just
Yeah, yeah.
remember this. It's like,
And or like a Henry Morey, or just
yeah.
you could immortalize these people. So I guess that's one of the perks and powers you do have as a writer. So I try to wield that power appropriately and as often as I can.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall that Mario shot your portrait for your book and for Big Bocce, and I just remember him being so tickled when he found out that he was in the novel. But of course, you can't talk about Little Tokyo and the Rafu without having Mario Reyes somehow as a character.
Yeah.
That's so incredible.
So
Um,
yeah, and I try to write, I mean, I need to write things that people who don't, I mean, this was the reaction from my first book, Summer of the Bibachi. Either people said, "Oh, I recognize that person. He's like my grandfather, my uncle, my gardener,"
Mm,
And the other comment was, "I never knew this world existed." So, as a novelist and my work's being now translated internationally, you have to balance, you have to write things that hopefully people all around the world could kind of resonate with. Yet on the other hand, you want to write in such a micro way, that tips your hat to all these people that like walk the streets of Little Tokyo
mm.
and such. Yeah.
That's incredible. Since you write both fiction and nonfiction, can you talk about the differences and what you find exciting, interesting, or challenging about each format?
I will say, I did one of my first long books was actually for the Japanese American National Museum. It was a
Mm.
biography on George Aratani,
Oh,
philanthropist, called An American Son. And I had interviewed him like over 30 times and, all these other people in his lives. And I was struggling to finish some of the Bibachi around the same time. But with George, with a real life person, when you're doing a biography, you have his life, his or her life that you could, that's your chronology. And from what you have there, you have to figure out what is the arc or the theme of this person's life. And that book was actually helpful to me because, well, I finished it earlier than I finished my mystery. But then I said, oh, okay, maybe I will interview Masarai, my fictional character, like I just interviewed George Aratani. And I think that it kind of helped. And just understanding the rhythm of what a nonfiction biography should be, and how about, how do we switch that, or how do we use some of those techniques for a novel, I think
mm,
was helpful. Um, my goal when I write nonfiction is really to get the real names of people in there, because you talked about with Rafu Shimpo, we're writing about people that mainstream media usually don't touch. So my goal is, okay, whether it's historic or today, is let's get those names down,
mm,
in something, whether it be in print or on, online. So, just maybe the only people who'd really care is their direct descendants or their family members, but still, there's something important about putting that name down. Um, with fiction, I do say I tell lies to tell the truth. There's some taboo topics, in our community that I think are important to discuss.
mm,
They're the truth. We've had like Japanese American gangs. We've had a lot of things on the dark side, and and within families, right? There's been strife, and I don't feel comfortable sometimes to write that in a nonfiction book, but I can explore that in fiction, which is
mm.
really helpful.
What is your process when you write? I'm always amazed that you're so you write you've written so many books, nonfiction, fiction. What is your process like? Do you have a goal? I am going to write so many pages, so many words a day, or is there
It
how
it
does
can
that work for you?
change. It
Hmm.
it, it can change. Certainly, I think when I'm deep in production and I have a deadline, it's like I gotta get some like 1,000 words down a
Mm,
day, So and I think a lot of my colleagues kind of shoot for that goal. Um, I'm in line edits for a book that's coming out next year. It's called Crown City. It's set in Pasadena in 1903. And you know, we've both been editors, right? But to be
right.
edited, I mean, the way it works in novel writing is you have you finish your draft, and then you have a developmental edit, and it's like Naomi, you're not getting into the voice of this character, or it's these kind of big issues, and then you have to do a rewrite. And now with I've done that a couple of times, and now it's like sentence by sentence, line by line.
Mm,
There's things kind of skipped over and have to go back, and I have to. A lot of times I don't like to have long conversations in my novels,
mm.
but my editor's saying, Naomi, you have to explain, how did this person get from here to there? I just want to transport them. Like, why do I have to write all this stuff in between? But yeah, so there's definitely in traditional publishing these benchmarks that you
Mm,
need to follow. But um, I do during the pandemic, because it was such an unusual time, I did writing sprints. I don't
mm,
know if you're familiar with that. What you get together with a person like online, and for 25 minutes you both just write, and you take a break for 5 minutes and then you go back. The thing that's happened today in our society is with social media and the internet and all that kind of stuff, it's so hard to focus.
mm,
And when you have to write a novel that's, 300 pages, it requires a certain, you can't do this ADHD thing and go in and out, and I think those writing sprints, when you're just, you don't go and stop and do research. You just go XXX, I got to keep writing. I think that kind of helps you kind of to get into the flow of writing something narratively that's long. Yeah.
mm. Are there, I think what I love about novels is you can kind of evoke things through sensory. When you're writing about Little Tokyo, is there food? Is there music? Are there things that you do to kind of find inspiration for different eras or different topics?
I think food is, I mean, there was a time period when I was writing my Masarai books that the food at Far East kept coming up, and the almond duck and the hamyu, and I found different ways to describe it, since my character's a gardener. I don't know. I think some of the sweet and sour pork look
Mm,
like, you know, automobile oil, like pork. I don't know. It doesn't sound too appetizing, but definitely I think chop suey, has always, because that's my nostalgia.
mm,
Far East Cafe was one of the, for those who don't know Little Tokyo, it's like, I think the only, well, they don't really serve chop suey food anymore, but at least as a building, it's a historic site, and you see the neon sign. And I think that helps sustain the Japanese American community for so long. And it's always interesting because it's, like down home Cantonese Chinese food that's prepared really for outsiders, right? And,
right. And
but yeah, go on.
oh no, I just remember one of my first memories of Little Tokyo was going to eat at Far East Cafe because my grandmother, they were doing a service. She had passed, and in Buddhist tradition, there's a certain number of years you go back, and because we're from Wakayama, it was at Koyasan. And so we would go to Far East Cafe, and then we went to Koyasan, and
Which is across the
which
street.
is just across the street. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think we can remember what the smell of walking in and the kind of grouchy guy at the cash register or all these things. It just brings back such memories. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's the beauty, I think, of fiction writing, is like the world building,
Mm,
and
mm,
each author has different strengths. I don't go on and on with beautiful physical description, but it's more like circumstantial or
mhm.
story based. And when I worked at the I think I integrated this, like, there was a lot of crime and a lot of our
Yeah.
cars got broken into, and someone stole one of the reporter's bowling ball. And I was just trying to just picture someone just like walking down Skid Row with a bowling ball. What for what, But it's more those kind of stories that I've kind of worked into my fiction work.
Well, I know you've written a number of series for Discover Nikkei, and I was struck by uh, I love the serialized format. I think that's just a fun way to kind of, uh, as a reader, it's kind of fun to look forward to the next chapter. And you wrote a Nikkei detective. And what I enjoyed about it was he's from Orange County, and that's where my husband Eric is from. And then he comes to Little Tokyo. But can you maybe share a little bit about Nikkei Detective specifically and about the series that you do for Discover Nikkei?
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure if I approached Yoko Nishimura of Discover Nikkei or she approached I'm maybe she approached me about writing something, and I like the serial format too because
Mm.
there's people like Charles Dickens, right?
Yeah.
And that's their whole novel was in the serialized format. And I was busy with my own, novel writing. So actually, I, with these serials, I really didn't have it outlined.
Mm.
There's usually 12, once a month. And it was just like, okay, I would have an idea for a scene and I would write it and turn it in. And the following month, it's like, okay, how am I going to build on this? And, most of them, a lot of them are mysteries that are on the Nikkei, Discover Nikkei website. And luckily, I think they all kind of resolved themselves, but it was kind of like a trapeze act, I'm walking on the tightrope. Is this really going to work? And somehow, some of it, maybe the pacing's a little odd, but yeah, true. Okay, so there was was it HBO? There was a series called True Detective, which is very dark,
Mm.
and it was kind of, I mean, not that Nikkei Detective is anything like that, but it was kind of I was going, oh, it'd be kind of fun to do something just based in Little Tokyo. My colleague Dale Furutani has actually written a novels of a person who's based in Little Tokyo. But I just thought it'd be kind of fun to bring an OC person, an outsider
Yeah.
who does not, he has, he's been busted uh, for drugs, so he's very limited on he doesn't have his driver's license anymore temporarily, and if you live in Los Angeles, that's kind of a death sentence. So that's why he ends up in Little Tokyo, which happens to be right close to the city hall and some of the courthouses. So it's not a bad place for a detective to be located. But another thing is I really enjoy writing not only from the female voice but a male voice.
Mm.
And, with my Masarai series, there's 7 books, told from a male point of view. And I just find it kind of freeing to write from a male point of view because guys get away with more stuff than women do. In just places they can feel safe exploring, like someone like us, we might be more apprehensive or we might be more at risk,
Mhm.
So yeah, it was kind of fun to write from this single dad's POV.
I love the family dynamic of it too. I think a lot of us Japanese Americans can relate to having, the perfect brother, the perfect sister, and then you're kind of a loser who is just scraping by. And so, and again, as you mentioned, the model minority, there's so much pressure on us to be a model minority, but then we don't all fit into that very convenient shoebox that we try to fit ourselves into. So,
Yeah, and you know what? I'm on a more serious note. I think in like the 60s, 70s, maybe beyond, maybe even the 50s, I think some young people felt so much pressure, and the to assimilate, if they lived in a white area like Orange County,
mhm.
and unfortunately, I've heard of self-harm, some people that even harmed themselves because they couldn't find a place that they felt comfortable with. So that's another reason why I like to write a variety of characters. Like,
Mm.
let's be honest, we're all not like Mr. Doc Physician or, successful business pe person. We're not all like that. So I think that's why, again, I like fiction so much.
Mm, that's so wonderful. And you're so busy, and why is it important to you to share your work on the Discover Nikkei platform?
Um, because I guess that all of my years at Rafu Shimpo, I really support what Discover Nikkei is doing. I like it. Well, I do like it because of the multilingual, aspect, and again, just my own transnational kind of upbringing. And I like how it goes into, preservation of history, and because it's hard to find those kind of stories now. Who's, publishing those kind of things, and because it's online, it's readily available to people. So I think those are all, very powerful and things that I enjoy about the platform.
I feel like Rafu Shimpo was a space where you had to be a Japanese American and maybe you didn't speak English, and then you had this Japanese staff who are, and then you somehow have to all get along and work together. And sometimes there's these clashes. So you kind of had to broaden yourself to these various different communities. And for myself, I worked with Harry Honda, and he was such a big proponent of the PANA, the Pan American Nikkei
Mm-hmm.
Society. And so he'd always be, he and Mickey would always be going to Peru or to all these various places. And if you don't get out of this bubble, you don't realize that there's Nikkei communities everywhere. So I do really appreciate how Discover Nikkei brings all of these communities together in this way. And Nagashima-san, that you know, at the Japanese, our longtime Japanese editor, he did quite a bit too. So I was glad for that. So I guess one thing I was very privileged last year to be asked by Naomi to draw the poster for the Imagine Little Tokyo short story contest. And at that time, you told me to do something that would evoke only murders in the building. So
Mm-hmm.
I drew the Far East Cafe building. Um, and it was kind of fun. And I snuck in a little Easter egg picture of Naomi because it seemed appropriate to put Naomi walking past the Far East Cafe building with the Tanabata ornament and Brian Quito people in there. And I kind of like to think of it as all these different stories happening in this building and people writing about it. And as a member of the Little Tokyo Society and co-chair of the Imagine Little Tokyo short story contest, for viewers who maybe are not familiar with it, this is an annual fiction writing contest that focuses on Los Angeles's Little Tokyo neighborhood. Discover Nikkei has worked with the Historical Society for the contest since the beginning, publishing the winning stories on its website. This was the 12th year of the contest, and all of the winning stories can be read on Discover Nikkei. Can you tell us how you got involved with the contest and what is your favorite part of it?
Sure. Oh, and before I answer that, thank you for making me into a cartoon character. And that's my dog
And
Mookie.
you're,
So
yes, I
thank you.
had to put Mookie in there
Yeah,
too. I
thank
didn't
you
want to
so
tell you about
much.
it, but I wanted to make sure Mookie was there because
Um, I really appreciate it. It's a thrill. I framed that poster and it's on our wall. So actually, the contest was a brainchild of Bill Watanabe,
Mm,
who had retired from the head of Little Tokyo Service Center, and he always has ideas, and he thought it'd be good, we could have a short story contest. So and I was with him from the very beginning, and we've grown in the Little Tokyo Historical Society, who's currently headed up by my good friend Mike Okumura. Is they are the sponsoring organization, in addition, in partnership with Discover Nikkei. But I love working with this group for many reasons. One is I love the people. And now that I'm kind of, I'm writing at home and I'm dealing with my New York editors, I need a toehold into my, little Tokyo community, and that's what this short story contest does. And there's about 13 people on the uh, committee, some Japanese speaking, and they're just so lovely and so much fun. I think the other reason is, we all have an interest in this place, the center of Los Angeles, Japanese America, Little Tokyo, to flourish. And yes, there are a lot of young people coming out and eating ramen and things like that, but Little Tokyo's more than that. And we want to kind of celebrate it as a cultural home to many of us, and it's cool too that we broaden it out to include beyond English adult. We have Japanese, and then we have youth. And actually, I think the Japanese and youth have kind of become my favorite features of it. Just because, again, when you're broadening out the world for our contests each year, we have three actors because we're in LA, we have access to this talent to read each one of the winning short stories. And such a thrill for the winners. And sometimes they live, in other states and countries, but they're trying to make a connection to this to Little Tokyo, which is just wonderful.
Mm. Are with the advances with AI, are there challenges now too as far as a contest goes? I don't know how that works, but
We had a big discussion about it. Luckily, on our committee is a former winner. His name is DC Palter, and he has worked in Silicon Valley, and he also edits a it's an English language on online magazine. So he's been giving us a lot of advice. One thing he did say is you can kind of tell when something is created by AI. Right now,
mm,
our rules are no AI,
mm,
and I think he's right. There could be a lot of mediocre AI stories. By that
mm.
I mean the grammar is perfect. And actually, I shouldn't say this because this could be this is a clue though. If if a short story has no misspellings and seems totally, grammatically perfect, that might be a sign that AI was used.
Ah,
So
okay.
you might want to
Noted.
purpose, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
There
yeah.
we go.
But there's some kind of a flatness, about AI stories, and it doesn't do dialogue that well. And when you're talking about, we have dozens of short stories, like what is the top-notch, stories? And I, yeah, those cannot be written by AI. Maybe the middle part, there are some AI stories there, but to be that at the very type, you need that kind of human observation. You need, and there's like cultural things. Like I think sometimes people come up with things from Japan, but we're talking about Little Tokyo and Japanese America. And I don't think AI totally has a handle on Japanese America yet. Maybe it might be a matter of time, but not quite yet.
It's good to hear that, as writers, that we're not being replaced yet by AI. So that's good to hear. In every episode of Nima Voices, we ask the guests the same set of rapid fire questions. So Naomi, here we go. Please answer whatever comes to mind. Uh, who is your Nikkei hero?
I have a couple, and this is because I know these people. I have interacted with these people. I have a relationship, so I've seen them at work. One would be Sue Kunitomi Embry, the late,
Mm.
who was instrumental in fighting for Manzanar to be a National Historic Site, and her, the next generation, her, they of Embry's have worked to keep that alive. So, and I'll never forget, there was a hearing about whether to make, to give Manzanar this designation, and there was a hearing in Lone Pine, and I actually drove like
Mm.
myself. I think in one day to be present at that hearing and to see Sue Kunitomi Embry there, making a case for it, and it's pretty much an all white room, was so inspirational to me. So she's and I did dedicate one of Clark and Division. She was one of
Mm.
the three women I dedicated the book to. And the other woman is alive is Evelyn Yoshimura, who I
Oh.
worked with at Rafu Shimpo, but she's more known as like a civil rights leader, many years at Little Tokyo Service Center. And just because of our time spent, with our cubicles very close to each other, there's just been lessons that I've learned from Evelyn, and one of them, I think I went to some kind of talk, and the question was, how do you avoid burnout, from doing this good work? And she said, you have to have fun, you know,
Mm.
there has to be an element of joy and fun in there. And she actually also introduced me to some mysteries written by African American people. And I was actually able to get the agent who represented the writer, Barbara Neely. This is the books that Evelyn and her husband gave me. So
Mm.
I'll always be yeah, grateful for that.
Mm,
That
that's
wasn't
wonderful.
too fast, sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay. That's wonderful. What is your favorite Japanese food?
It depends on the day, but I will have to say grilled mackerel with daikon oroshi, so shoyu, and um, a bowl of piping hot rice.
Mm, yeah, that sounds really good. That sounds good right now.
Yeah.
What is the Japanese value that has most influenced you?
I think it's actually this concept of kyodo,
Mm.
like cooperatives, like
Mm.
kyodo
Yeah,
kumiai.
yeah.
Because that's what when the farmers, Issei farmers came here, when the gardeners came here, even though they were kind of in competition with each other, back in Japan, they formed these cooperatives, like,
Mm.
to get a good deal on fertilizer or whatever. So even though they're competitors, they had to somehow work together. And I kind of liken it to like redress and reparations
Mm.
movement. Like, let's be real, there's so many feuds, at the Rafu, we're always constantly writing about conflict. But when it's all said and done, because of pressure, because of the racism in the society or other obstacles, even though some people hate each other, there's been times we've been called to work together and it's been successful.
Mm.
And on a more personal note, my auntie, my cousin, my aunt and uncle had four boys, so I have
Mm.
four one of them passed away, unfortunately. But in the hallway, she's Kibe Nisei, and she had a sign like Nakayoku shite kudasai,
Mm.
Nakayoku
Mm.
meaning get along. So I just thought that was really cool because, we didn't put messages on our hallways, but I think that's a good thing to remember. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. So you and I both worked at the Rafu Shimpo. What do you see as the future of or community storytelling and journalism, the work that we've spent much of our lives doing?
Well, it's in peril,
Mm.
but that's all communities, right? Newspapers have been dying for a very long time, and it's very upsetting. And the whole notion of misinformation is quite terrible. So, yeah, so Rafu Shimpo is only coming out once a week, which is kind of unfortunate. But there are, like Kenji Taguma, he has the model of the Nichibei weekly, coming out on a weekly basis, and he has formed a nonprofit. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that is one solution that some people have turned to make. I mean, it's not easy to raise that money. but to create some of these news entities as nonprofit organizations. Um,
I'm always wondering, how do you reach, I mean, the news has to be someplace where your reader is. And so you and I or my parents may have read a physical newspaper, but let's get real. Gen Z is not going to read or see things. And if you want to fight disinformation, misinformation, you have to be where they are. So where is that going to be? And how do you ensure that accuracy and transparency is there? I mean,
That's such a good question, Gwen. So I'm on social media. I pared down, but my readers tend to be older, so I am on Facebook. I have an author page,
mm,
and actually it gets a lot of engagement. And
mm,
sometimes I'm a bit glib, I'll be honest. And if I was writing an article for Rafu Shimpo, I would contact people, before I would you know, publish the story. But with social media, sometimes, oh, I hear something and I put it on social media. And then I've come, people say, Naomi, that's incorrect, and I was going, okay, I'll fix it, But yeah, a lot of people are getting things. I don't know, that's such an interesting question. I don't know. I know for me personally,
mm,
I've been a little more cautious, or taking a little more time when I post something on social media. So let me
mhm,
make sure, is it the right city? Is it the right circumstance? So I don't know if we need, like to create suggested guidelines for, people who are very active on social media, I'm not sure what maybe we just need to have a discussion about it.
mm,
But I will say, yeah, people are getting a lot of stuff from TikTok, from, short form videos. But there's really no standards. So
mhm,
I don't know if that's something like a group like AJA or something new is
mhm.
created to kind of at least have these discussions, would
Right,
be helpful, I think.
right. I think so. And I appreciate and I always enjoy reading your posts. I feel like there should be a whole site for kind of introverted people who don't necessarily feel comfortable posting about their lives on social media. It's something, I struggle with personally, I guess. But well, gosh, we've covered so many things. Is there uh, anything as far as writing or storytelling, you think?
Um, I do think, um I will end on this.
Mm,
In spite of um, so much misinformation that's coming out, I do think that story is still so powerful. I think our culture, humankind needs it. And so I'm glad to be supporting, like in a small way, like the Imagine Little Tokyo Short Story Contest. But I think it's good for all of us to kind of consider, like, how do I tell my story? Maybe my story will not go out on social media. Maybe my story is just for my family. But when people are gone, um, I think the most important things to leave behind is story. So
mm.
I'm not sure if Japanese Americans are doing that, but I would encourage them to do so.
That's such great words. I mean, I think of the same thing, the work at the Rafu, making sure that people's names are there, that they're the accuracy that uh, these kind of stories and these individuals are not forgotten. And if it's at a newspaper or for your own family, for your own history, I think it's so important. Thank you so much for taking this time. It's been such a wonderful discussion. Uh, Please check out Naomi's stories on Discover Nikkei, which you can find in the video description below. You can read the winning stories from the Imagine Little Tokyo Short Story Contest on Discover Nikkei. You can also watch the awards ceremony from this year and previous years on Discover Nikkei's YouTube channel, featuring dramatic readings of the winning stories. Naomi, are there any final thoughts?
Thanks, Gwen for being David Ono.
Not David Ono, not David Ono. I'm the no, thank you. Thank you so much, Naomi. This concludes today's Nima Voices interview, but don't worry, Discover Nikkei has more virtual programs planned for 2025. Discover Nikkei has put out the call for stories for its annual Nikkei Chronicles writing project. This year's theme is Nikkei Family 2, Remembering Roots, Leaving Legacies. We invite you to share your Nikkei family stories to be included in this special series. The deadline for submissions is September 30th, 2025. Visit the link in the description box below to learn more. If you enjoyed this program, please consider making a donation to support Discover Nikkei's 20 for 20 campaign. Access to all our content and virtual programs is free, but we can't do it without funds. This campaign celebrates the first 20 years of Discover Nikkei and sets us up to create even more exciting programs and offerings over the next 20 years. And finally, Discover Nikkei would love to hear from you. Contact them at editor@discovernikkei.org with your feedback and suggestions for future episodes and programs. Thank you again, Naomi, and thank you for watching. Bye.